Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary with a knife video. Today, I want to start off by saying I'm a big fan of Jason Brous, okay? And you guys know that if you've seen any of these videos, I'm generally I like the Brous blades that I have. There are a couple that I just don't like the look of, the Reloader, for example. But my VR71 I really like. My Silent Soldier Flipper I really like. You guys know I recently did a review of the Division, and again, I really liked it. I just like the fact that with Jason Brous, you're getting really well-made stuff, okay? Extremely well-made stuff. It's a reasonable price, okay? I know they're a little more expensive, but compared to other mid-techs, they're actually very affordable. And you're getting for that, you know, $100, $200, or $300, you're getting a knife that you know the maker has actually had a hands-on interaction with, which is pretty cool as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so today I'm talking about a knife that I got primarily because I'm a fan of Jason Brous. This is the Silent Soldier V1, the Warncliffe style blade. Obviously it's a fixed blade, and I got this knife not really saying to myself, you know, I didn't say, hey, I'd really like to carry a small fixed blade, maybe I should look around and see what's out there. Not at all, okay? That was not the thought process. The thought process was, hey, I like Jason Brous. This is one of his earlier, you know, efforts, and so I want to try it out. Okay, so I found a really good deal. That was, of course, that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. I knew about the VR71, so when I saw one for a really reasonable price, I was like, yeah, I'll pick it up. So I got this knife. I carried it as a neck knife, which is how it's marketed and how it comes with a chain on it, and I didn't like it at all as a neck knife. I didn't like the fact that I have this weight around my neck. I didn't like that to access the blade I had to reach up under my shirt and, you know, try to get it out without cutting myself or getting tangled in anything. And so for the first few days, I was like, I don't know about this knife. It might just be one that sits on my shelf with my other Brous blades as part of the collection. Then I thought, you know, let's try the clip. So clip this thing to my belt initially, and then to the waistband of my pants, and from there was no looking back. This knife from that point on hardly has left my side. Okay, the way I carry it, the way I tried it out at first, and the way I've done it ever since is to just clip it right here under my t-shirt. No one can tell I have it. It's easily accessible. In fact, with one hand I can easily get to the knife, extract it, use it, put it back, and I'm done. Okay, let me take that off when I'm standing. Hopefully that was all in focus. If it wasn't that focused, I think you can still get the general idea for what I'm talking about. That's how I carry it, and I love it that way. Okay, easily accessible, super fast, totally concealable. It's really a perfect knife for that situation. So for me, that's the perfect configuration for this knife. And in that role, okay, in that configuration, I have literally carried this almost non-stop since I started doing it that way. When I was carrying it as a neck knife, I'd get sick of it and be like, okay, I'm not bringing this with me anymore. Since I started carrying it that way, you don't even notice it's there, which is of course what we want to see when we have an EDC knife. You just totally forget you even have it. So big win for me in that configuration. Okay, so let's get into now the specifics of this knife. Actually, hold off, one last thing before we do that. Let's do size and weight, and then we'll do comparisons. Okay, so size and weight on this is 4 3/4 inches with the sheath, 4 5/8 out of the sheath. The blade length is 2 3/16. Okay. The weight on this, now this is something a little bit annoying. I've looked at a lot of websites. They always list 2.1 something, 2.14 ounces, let's say, around there. And I'm like, that doesn't seem right. Like 2.14 ounces, well, it's not right. It's the weight of just the blade without the sheath. Well, I'd love to know who's carrying this knife around like this. Who cares what it weighs without the sheath? You can't carry it that way. It's completely, anyway. So, at least I figure if they're going to do that, they should give you the weight in the sheath so you know how much it's going to weigh when you actually have it on your person. So the weight in the sheath is 3.2 ounces, okay? And that's the weight we care about because that's how we're going to carry it. Whether we're carrying it as a neck knife or in our pocket or on our waistband, it's got to be in the sheath. So that's the weight that matters, all right? It'd be like giving you, I don't know, Forget it. I'm done. That's my rant about weight. With all knives, I think retailers should be listing, this is how much it weighs with the sheath. If you want to list the other, that's great, but no one cares because no one's carrying a knife around out of the sheath. So you need the weight with the sheath. Anyway, let's get back to the specifics of this knife. Some other comparable blades, of course, the Silent Soldier Flipper compares this way, and I would actually say if you're looking at both of these, this one's probably more practical. You're getting the same amount of cutting power, okay? The blade length, the cutting length is the same. The difference is this one weighs less, it's way smaller, and it costs a lot less. So if you're just looking for the blade, you're probably better off going with the fixed blade. Now, I love the VR71, one of the best flippers that I have. It's amazing how well this flips. I would compare it in terms of speed and ease of use to the Buck 830 Marksman, and I've often commented that that's probably the best flipper I've ever seen. It's amazing. Okay, so I love the flipper, but from just a pure practicality standpoint, this is probably a superior blade. Now I do want to compare it to a couple other common EDC fixed blades. So here's an SE Azula. Obviously, you can see the Azula is much bigger. It weighs quite a bit more, but you're only actually sacrificing, now yes, the handle is much larger on the Azula. You're getting a lot less handle, but you're not giving up that much blade length. Now, for really hard work, if you're bushcrafting or you're doing a lot of cutting, the Azula is going to perform a little better because of that handle. This handle is going to fatigue your hand pretty quickly. So they're not kind of the same role. This is sort of, some people carry this as like a backup survival knife, and it works well. This one, not so much as a backup survival knife. It's more of an EDC utility, or maybe last-ditch combat, even though, I don't know. I think this is, the heart of this knife is more as a utility blade as far as I'm concerned. I love it in that role. One other very common EDC fixed blade to show you, this is the Minimalist. And this is, again, really, really popular. Tons of people carry this. This, again, is marketed as a neck knife. It's okay. It's certainly a lot lighter than the Brous, but I still don't really like it as a neck knife. It's still, who wants something that big hanging around their neck all the time? Okay? Again, I would rather clip this to my belt or even put it right in my pocket. Now, here is how they compare to one another in terms of size. You can see that the Minimalist is a fair bit longer, but has quite a bit less blade length. So if I put these two either, I'll put the blade, line up the sharpened edge. You can see there's quite a bit less sharpened edge on the Minimalist. In terms of actual cutting power, what I will say is the Minimalist is a pretty cheap steel, so it dulls much easier than the Silent Soldier. All right, now we're all kind of done with the comparisons and the size and weight. Let's zoom in and talk about some of the specifics on this blade. Come on. Okay, so there we are in a close-up. The blade length again on this is 2 3/16. It's a fairly thick piece of D2 steel, and I love D2 steel. I've said this before. Come on, focus. D2 is probably one of my favorite steels. Yes, it's not fully stainless, but it does pretty well. I don't have any of my D2 blades that have rusted on me. Maybe you have a different experience, and it's pretty humid here. I live in Meaford, Ontario, and we often get days with 70 or 80% humidity. Not every day, of course, but even in the winter, it's quite humid, and so there's a good potential here for rust, but I have had no problems. The thing that I do love about D2 is its performance. It is one of those steels that takes an edge way easier than it should when you consider how well it holds that edge. So, normally you'd say, hey, a knife that's really easy to sharpen is also really easy to dull. In this case, you've got a steel that's relatively easy to sharpen, but holds that edge really well, which of course is a real win. Like that's kind of what we look for in our blade steels, right? So, great steel. And this blade, it's fairly thick. Okay, if I kind of put my two fingers there, you can see that you've got a fairly thick piece of steel, and the grind is fairly thick as well, but the sharpened edge, so the secondary bevel, is kind of laid back so that you actually end up with a knife that cuts pretty well, even though other knives that have similar amount of steel behind the edge wouldn't slice as well as this one does. Now I will say, because of its shape and because of its length, it's not practical for, let's say, food prep. Maybe you could slice cheese with it, but it would be a little uncomfortable. But you know, if you're cutting up an apple or something, you don't have enough reach here to get across a whole apple, so you couldn't cut an apple in half with this. It's more, in my mind, for it as a utility blade. And in that role, it works really well. I've done a lot of cutting. You have lots of different grips here. I know we're not quite talking about the handle yet, but you know, in this is how I usually hold it. You can also hold it like this and get some really fine work done. Okay, we'll talk more about that in a second, but this blade, it's just, you know, yes, it's quite thick, it's very tough, takes a really good edge, nice sharp point, very effective as a utility blade. Okay, now I know it's kind of designed as a last-ditch self-defense tool, and it would work that way. It's certainly not my purpose for it, and I think if I was, you know, let's say I was a soldier deployed overseas, I would probably take something else as my last-ditch blade, probably a folder, and my primary blade would be a larger fixed blade. All right, so let's back out a little bit so we can talk about the handle and the sheath. Come on. There we go, perfect. Okay, so now you should be able to see the whole thing. So when we talk about the handle and the sheath together, the first thing I want to talk about is getting this knife out. The way I do it, I reach across my body, put that finger in, and it's immediately in position to use for cutting. The other cool thing about this handle, and I know this from a great deal of experience, the other day I was working away trying to hang up some screen, and I won't get into all the details of the job, but I was cutting and then working and cutting and working. And so what I found is this knife works really well just on your finger like this. You could do all your work, you know, pull out a piece of tape, stick it to something, cut the tape off, go back to, it just worked really, really well in this configuration. So you had all the dexterity of your hand, and then when you needed to cut something, just flip it around and cut it. Works really well. Now in a combat role, again, I could see the value of this if you're grappling and you're, you know, let's say you're doing Aikido or something like that, Brazilian martial arts where there's a lot of hand locks and moves. You have the ability to use your hand, but then when you need it, you've also got that blade, okay? So really, really cool. And from a utility standpoint, it's really, really handy to have a knife that'll just sit there while you're doing whatever you're going to do, and then when you want to cut something, you can also cut without repositioning the knife very much, all right? So that's the handle. I will say about 99.9% of the time, this is how I use it. So the back here sits into your palm, middle finger goes here in that choil, index finger through the blade or through this hole, and this is how I almost 100% use the blade. The odd time I will use it in sort of a pinched grip like this, where the other day I can tell you, like specifically opening packages, this works really well, and I've used the knife that way quite a bit for any time where you're trying to get down and cut flat along a surface, like opening a blister pack, okay, which I just did yesterday with it. And so that's the other way that I've used it. Yes, there are other possibilities. This, by the way, is not one of them. It's horribly uncomfortable and terrible in that role. I guess you could, yeah, there's no other really convenient way. This second hole just becomes part of the handle, okay? I can't think of any good way to put your finger through there and get any use out of it. You could, I suppose, have this in a reverse grip. And again, this would be more for combat than anything else. Pulling it through, you know, if you're doing a pull cut, I guess that could kind of work as well. It's not terribly comfortable. Overall, though, I find this handle to be totally workable. And you know, I wouldn't want to do prolonged use with this handle. It's not really designed for long-term use. It's more make your cut and, you know, keep this here or put it back in the sheath, okay? Now let's talk about that sheath. It is Kydex. There's a little bit of wiggle, and I've seen some guys who have these who don't get any wiggle in there, so this one has some. The cool thing is, because it's Kydex, you can very easily heat this up. It's just this back here that's not quite tight enough. You could easily heat this up and tighten this down and let it dry that way, or let it cool that way, and then it would reharden to this configuration. So it does give you that option if you want a little DIY project, that you could certainly do that. Obviously it's Kydex rather than some kind of plastic, and that the advantage of that is lots of guys with plastic sheaths will comment how it dulls the blade. Kydex, to my knowledge, doesn't have that problem, but it does retain really, really well. That also gives you lots of good carry options. Okay, a sheath like this, you know, you can, doesn't matter any way you want to put it, you can easily, this knife will retain really well. So it doesn't matter whether you want to strap this to your chest with paracord, or tie it to a pack, or even just drop it in your pocket. The sheath works well for pretty much anything you could want to do. And my main, when I look at a sheath, that's my main consideration, is versatility. I want to know that when I get a sheath, I'm not stuck putting it this way, you know, on the side of my leg. I can carry it horizontally, I can carry it upside down. I want to know with any sheath, that any knife that I'm looking at buying, I want to make sure that this sheath can be carried any way I want to, because I've often found with fixed blades that it takes me a few tries to find what's comfortable and what works for me. And if I've got a sheath that doesn't allow me to try different positions, that can be a real deal breaker. Okay, so sheath is, again, definitely a win, with the exception of that little bit of wiggle, which doesn't bother. It doesn't wiggle that way when I'm walking around or using it. So because of that, you know, if it wiggled when I was carrying it, yeah, that would get annoying, but it doesn't do that. All right, so overall, this is a great blade. Now, it's not, you know, it's to me, it's a secondary blade. Okay, it's a utility blade. Again, not you're not going to do food prep with it. You're not going to skin animals with it. There's not enough length. There's no belly. But as a secondary sort of utility blade to have with you and access quickly, I don't think you can do any better. One thing I will say is this is much more comfortable than the SOG Snarl. I've tried the Snarl on 3 different occasions in stores. I haven't bought it, but I have tried it on a number of occasions and found it to be totally uncomfortable and not easy to cut with, and just not something that I have any interest in. I was a little worried about this because of that, but when I got it, this does not feel anything like the SOG Snarl. Okay, this is actually a real win. I would highly, highly recommend this. I said the other day, I think on Instagram maybe, that my problem with this knife is trying to not carry it. Like every morning when I'm getting ready, I'm like, yeah, may as well put it on. Just clip it to my pants and away I go. You know, it's a rare day that I don't have it with me. So I'm going to, one of the things you'll see coming up is I'm going to try to get some other smaller fixed blades and see if I like others as much as I like this one. Okay, there you go, guys. That's my take on the very, very excellent Brous Blades Silent Soldier Fixed Blade V1. That's the Wharncliffe. All right, we'll talk to you later.